Lieutenant Nova Kess stared at the pulsing signal on her navigation console, her crystalline antennae twitching with disbelief. The reading couldn't be right. The shrouded sector had been dead for over 3 centuries. No ships, no transmissions, nothing but ancient debris fields and stellar dust. Yet there it was, a perfect sine wave, too precise to be natural, too powerful to be echo radiation from the sector's countless derelict stations. Someone was out there, broadcasting on frequencies that hadn't been used since before the Great Silence. "Control, this is Navigator Kess on the VSS Daybreak," Nova transmitted, her 4-fingered hand hovering over the Emergency Protocols panel. "I'm picking up an artificial signal from coordinates 227 Mark 44 in the shrouded sector, requesting verification." The response came instantly, sharp with authority. "Negative, Navigator. The shrouded sector is quarantined by order of the Arcturian High Command. Maintain your patrol route." Nova's iridescent scales shifted from their usual calm blue to a troubled violet. "With respect, Control, this signal matches no known Arcturian or consortium frequencies. If someone's breached the quarantine..." "The quarantine has not been breached, Navigator," Control cut in. "What you're detecting is residual radiation from the sector's quantum decay. Continue your patrol." Nova's antennae flattened against her skull. She'd studied quantum decay patterns during her academy years. This was nothing like that. The signal was structured, almost musical in its precision. It reminded her of something she'd once found in the restricted archives, back when she'd been researching her thesis on pre-silence communication methods. Her fingers flew across the console, pulling up ancient frequency tables. There, buried in the oldest records, classified under the highest security protocols, the signal's pattern matched exactly with something labeled Human Emergency Beacon, Type HFY. Nova's heart skipped a beat. Humans, the bogeymen of Arcturian history, the savage species that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization before the Arcturian fleet had driven them to extinction. Every child knew the stories. How humans had emerged from their backwater solar system with impossible technologies and inexplicable abilities, how they'd refused to submit to proper galactic authority, how their resistance had forced the Arcturian-led consortium to take drastic action. But if humans had truly been wiped out, why was one of their emergency beacons active now, 3 centuries later? Nova glanced at her patrol route, then back at the signal. The smart move would be to follow orders, file her report, and let High Command dismiss it like they dismissed everything unusual from the shrouded sector. It was the safe choice, the proper choice. She plotted a new course instead. The VSS Daybreak's quantum engines hummed as Nova guided the patrol ship closer to the signal source. She kept her active sensors minimal. If there really was something out there, she didn't want to announce her presence too obviously. As the ship penetrated deeper into the shrouded sector, the usual background radiation increased, creating a static haze across her instruments. Then she saw it. The vessel hung in space like a geometric impossibility, all sharp angles and smooth curves that seemed to defy normal engineering principles. It was smaller than her patrol ship, but something about its design suggested immense power contained in an efficient package. No weapon ports were visible, but Nova's threat assessment systems were screaming warnings about energy readings that made no sense. It was either a human ship, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it look like one. Nova had just begun recording detailed scans when her communication system crackled to life. The voice that came through was unlike anything she'd ever heard, somehow both organic and synthetic at the same time. "Arcturian vessel, you are approaching restricted space. State your intentions." Nova's scales shifted to pale green with shock. The voice was speaking perfect modern Arcturian, but with an accent that sent chills down her spine. She opened her mouth to respond, but the voice continued. "Lieutenant Nova Kess of the VSS Daybreak, your neural signature has been logged. Please be advised that your current actions violate several provisions of the Arcturian Human Accords of 2847. Nova's mind reeled. The Arcturian Human Accords. There were no such accords. Humans had been wiped out in 2843, before any treaties could be signed. Every historical record confirmed this. Unless. Impossible, she whispered. The records say you're extinct. A sound came through her speakers that took her a moment to identify as laughter. Lieutenant Kess, I think you'll find that many of your records are somewhat incomplete. Would you like to know why? Nova stared at the impossible ship, her training warring with her curiosity. Everything she knew told her to retreat, to report this, to let her superiors handle it. But 3 centuries of questions about the shrouded sector, about the Great Silence, about why her people were so desperate to keep anyone from looking too closely at this region of space, all of it could be answered right now. She made her decision. Yes, she said. Show me. The human ship's response was immediate. A stream of data began flowing into her systems, not forcing its way in, but waiting at the boundaries of her firewalls, offering itself for verification. Nova hesitated only a moment before accepting the transmission. What she saw in the next few moments would change everything she thought she knew about her civilization's history. And somewhere in the darkness of the shrouded sector, humanity's long wait was finally coming to an end. The data streamed across Nova's screens, transforming her small patrol ship's bridge into a theater of impossible truths. Historical records, unaltered sensor logs, diplomatic transmissions, all of them painting a picture radically different from the history she'd learned since childhood. The humans hadn't attacked first. They hadn't even resisted. 3 centuries ago, humanity had emerged into the galactic community with technologies that seemed to defy the known laws of physics, while other species had slowly crept across space using quantum tunneling and fold drives. Humans had somehow mastered what they called probability manipulation, the ability to select favorable outcomes from infinite possible futures. The Arcturian High Command had seen this not as an opportunity, but as an existential threat. Your leaders feared what we represented, the human voice explained as Nova watched footage of peaceful first contact meetings transform into ambushes. Not our technology, that could be studied and replicated. They feared our perspective, our chaos, our ability to think in ways that violated their precious hierarchies of order. Nova's scales had shifted to ash gray, a sign of deep distress among her people. The footage showed Arcturian warships opening fire on human colonies, civilian stations, unarmed research vessels. This can't be right, she whispered. We're peacekeepers. We maintain order in the galaxy. We don't. We wouldn't. Your people chose order over truth, the voice said gently. And then they chose to forget that choice. More data flowed. Nova saw how human probability manipulation had allowed them to save millions of their people, predicting each attack just in time to evacuate. She saw how they'd used their technology not to counterattack, but to hide, to protect, to preserve life wherever possible. The final images showed the truth of the shrouded sector. It wasn't a dead zone at all. It was a sanctuary, carefully hidden behind veils of manipulated probability. Millions of humans lived here, along with refugees from dozens of other species who had fled Arcturian peacekeeping. Why show me this? Nova asked, her voice trembling. Why now? Because the probability streams are shifting, the voice replied. We've seen millions of possible futures, Lieutenant Kess. In most of them, the truth remains hidden, and your civilization continues its slow slide into stagnation and collapse. But in a few, a precious few, someone like you learns the truth at exactly the right moment. Someone whose conscience is stronger than their conditioning. Nova's antennae twisted in confusion. What do you mean, collapse? The Arcturian Consortium is at its height of power. A new set of data appeared. Economic projections, social stability metrics, resource depletion analyses. Nova's training in stellar cartography allowed her to spot the patterns immediately. The consortium's obsession with order and control was slowly strangling innovation, adaptation, and growth. Within another century, it would begin to fall apart. Unless, she asked, already suspecting the answer. Unless it changes, the human voice confirmed. Unless it remembers how to embrace uncertainty, adaptation, and yes, even a little chaos. The qualities your leaders once feared in us are the very things your civilization needs to survive. Nova stood from her console and began pacing the small bridge. Her mind raced through the implications. If she brought this evidence to her superiors, they would suppress it. If she tried to spread it publicly, she would be discredited or worse. The High Command had spent centuries building their version of history. They wouldn't let one junior lieutenant tear it down. "I don't understand what you expect me to do with this information," she said finally. "I'm just a patrol navigator. I don't have any real power or influence." The human ship's response was immediate. "You have the power to make a choice, Lieutenant Kess. In approximately 43 minutes, an Arcturian battle group will arrive in response to your prolonged presence in the shrouded sector. They will demand that we surrender or be destroyed. They will order you to confirm their version of events, that we attacked you, that we are pirates or rebels who must be eliminated." Nova's scales rippled with anxiety. "And what are my options? You can obey, maintain order, and let your civilization continue its path toward collapse. Or you can help us show them the truth, not just about history, but about humanity's true gift to the galaxy, which is the courage to face uncertainty, to embrace change, to choose hope over fear." The human voice carried a warmth that Nova found strangely compelling. "We've spent 3 centuries developing our probability manipulation technology. We can now show people not just what was, but what could be. The possible futures where cooperation breeds innovation, where diversity creates resilience, where chaos and order dance in perfect balance." Warning signals flashed across Nova's console. The battle group had arrived early. Only 7 minutes had passed, not 43. Nova's heart raced as her tactical display lit up with the signatures of 5 heavy cruisers dropping out of quantum space. The human voice seemed unsurprised. "Ah, it seems they're becoming slightly better at dealing with uncertainty themselves. Your choice has arrived ahead of schedule, Lieutenant Kess. What future will you help create?" Nova stared at her console, her scales shifting through patterns of confusion, fear, and finally, determination. She opened a channel to the approaching battle group and took a deep breath. Everything hung on what she would say next, not just her future, but perhaps the future of her entire civilization. She began to speak. Nova's voice remained steady as she addressed the battle group, even as her scales rippled with tension. "This is Lieutenant Nova Kess of the VSS Daybreak. I'm transmitting a priority data package to all ships. Authentication code Sigma 793. Lieutenant, maintain position and prepare to be boarded," came the immediate response from the battle group commander. "Any unauthorized transmissions will be considered an act of treason." But Nova had already initiated the data burst the human ship had prepared. Her fingers flew across her console, bypassing standard protocols to broadcast directly to every ship in range. The humans had shown her how to do it. A simple exploit that had existed in Arcturian systems for centuries, deliberately left in place for just such a moment. "What you're about to see is the truth," she announced, watching as the transmission indicators turned green across her display. "I ask only that you watch before taking action." The human ship remained silent beside her, its strange geometry seeming to bend the very light around it. On her tactical display, Nova could see the battle group's weapons powering up, but they hadn't fired yet. They were watching. The data package contained a carefully curated selection of the historical records she'd just seen, but with a crucial addition. The humans had included real-time probability projections, showing each ship's crew the immediate consequences of their next actions. Nova could see it too, branching timelines spreading out from this moment like a crystalline web. In most probability streams, the battle group opened fire. In some, they succeeded in destroying both ships. In others, the human vessel revealed devastating defensive capabilities that turned the engagement into a massacre. But in a precious few timelines, something else happened. Lieutenant Kess, a new voice cut through her communications. "This is Captain Venn of the ANS Stormbreak. These records, they can't be authentic. This would mean. It would mean that everything we know about the Great Silence is a lie." Nova finished. "Yes, Captain. But more importantly, it means we have a choice to make. Right now, look at your probability feeds. Look at what happens if we continue on our current path." The tactical display showed the battle group ships shifting position slightly. Their weapons remained charged, but no targeting locks had been initiated. They were watching the probability streams too, seeing the cascading consequences of violence versus understanding. "This is impossible," another commander broke in. "These readings violate half a dozen laws of physics. They can't be real." "That's what High Command said about humanity's technology 3 centuries ago," Nova replied. "They feared what they couldn't understand, so they tried to destroy it. And then they tried to make us forget it ever existed. But ask yourselves, what has that fear cost us?" The human ship chose that moment to transmit its own data stream, not to the battle group's tactical systems, but to their environmental controls. Suddenly, every ship's bridge was filled with holographic projections showing 2 distinct futures. In one, the Arcturian Consortium continued its path of rigid control, spreading across the galaxy like a crystalline lattice, beautiful, ordered, and utterly brittle. Nova watched as that future showed their civilization calcifying, unable to adapt to new challenges, eventually shattering under its own weight. In the other timeline, Nova saw her people learning from humanity, incorporating their insights about probability and uncertainty. The crystalline lattice remained, but now it was shot through with organic patterns, adapting and growing. It showed a civilization that had learned to balance order with chaos, strength with flexibility. "You're asking us to throw away centuries of stability based on some fancy holographic tricks," Captain Venn said, but Nova could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Even if these records are real, how can we just?" He was cut off by new alarms blaring across every ship. Nova's tactical display lit up with dozens of quantum space ruptures as more vessels emerged from fold space. But these weren't Arcturian designs. Some she recognized from historical records, ships belonging to species that had supposedly gone extinct during the Great Silence. Others were completely unknown, representing civilizations that had developed in secret within the shrouded sector. And at their center, emerging like a myth made real, was a human diplomatic vessel. Its design somehow managed to incorporate aspects of every species present, a physical representation of cooperation and mutual growth. The Arcturian Consortium doesn't have to fall. The original human voice transmitted on all frequencies. It doesn't have to choose between absolute control and total chaos. We've spent 3 centuries developing ways to navigate uncertainty, to find paths between extremes. We're not here to conquer or destroy. We're here to share what we've learned. Nova watched the probability streams shift and dance. The future where weapons fired was becoming fainter, while the timeline of cooperation grew stronger, but it wasn't guaranteed. It all hung on what happened in the next few moments. "Captain Venn," she said softly, "the choice isn't between order and chaos. It's between growth and stagnation, between truth and comfort, between fear and hope." She took a deep breath. "What future will you help create?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Nova could see the probability streams narrowing, converging toward a single decisive moment. Everything she had done, everything she had learned, had led to this point. Then Captain Venn spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "All ships, power down weapons. Open diplomatic channels." A pause then. "Let's see what hope looks like." The next 12 hours aboard the VSS Daybreak passed in a blur of diplomatic transmissions and probability calculations. Nova found herself serving as an impromptu liaison between the human delegation and the Arcturian battle group, her unique position as the first contact point making her suddenly invaluable. The human diplomatic vessel. which had introduced itself as the Terra Concordia, had transformed its central chamber into a remarkable hybrid space that accommodated the physical needs of every species present. Nova sat at a crystalline conference table that somehow managed to be both perfectly Arcturian in design and subtly different in ways she couldn't quite define. The challenge, the human ambassador was saying, isn't just revealing the truth. It's helping your people understand why the lie seemed necessary in the first place. The ambassador, who had introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, was a striking figure. Her probability manipulation tech was subtle but evident in the way small objects around her seemed to move in impossible ways, always ending up exactly where they were needed. Captain Ven, who had taken command of the diplomatic response, flexed his antennae in frustration. How do we tell our people that our entire civilization is built on a foundation of fear? That we've been stagnating for centuries because we were afraid of what? Change. Uncertainty. Of freedom, Nova said quietly. All eyes turned to her, and she felt her scales shift to a deep purple of emotional intensity. Not just freedom to act, but freedom to question. Freedom to doubt. Freedom to choose paths that might lead to failure. She gestured at the probability streams visible in the air around them. Look at what the humans have achieved by embracing uncertainty. They can literally see the consequences of choices before making them. Dr. Chen nodded. But we can only see possibilities, not certainties. Every prediction, every probability stream, still requires a choice. Technology can inform wisdom, but it can't replace it. The meeting was interrupted by a priority alert. Nova's scales paled as she read the transmission. High Command has responded to the situation. There, she swallowed hard. They're deploying the entire home fleet. 30 capital ships, at least 100 support vessels. They're saying this is a hostile incursion into Arcturian space and must be met with overwhelming force. The probability streams around them shifted violently, dark futures blossoming like toxic flowers. Nova could see versions where the battle turned the shrouded sector into a graveyard, others where the conflict spread to consume the entire arm of the galaxy. But there were other possibilities too, harder to reach, but shining with potential. Dr. Chen studied the streams with professional interest. They're reacting exactly as their programming dictates. When faced with a challenge to their authority, they escalate to overwhelming force. It's worked for them for centuries. Why change now? Because it won't work this time, Nova realized, watching the probability streams. Your ships, they're not actually here, are they? These are just projections, probability shadows of vessels that could be here. The human ambassador smiled. Very good, Lieutenant. You're beginning to understand how we think. No, our actual fleet is elsewhere. Elsewhere, you might say. We learned long ago that the best way to handle overwhelming force is to simply not be where it's applied. Captain Ven's scales shifted to a confused yellow-green. Then what are we even doing here? If this is all just some kind of elaborate illusion. This is very real, Dr. Chen interrupted. These conversations, these choices, these moments of understanding, they're the most real things happening in this sector of space right now. We're showing you what's possible when you stop relying on force and start embracing probability. Nova stood up suddenly, her antennae rigid with realization. The home fleet deployment. It's not a threat to you at all. It's an opportunity. The probability streams around them shifted again. And now Nova could see what the humans had been working toward all along. The massive deployment would bring together every major military and political leader in the consortium. Everyone who needed to understand the truth about their history would be gathered in one place. You're going to show them everything, she breathed. Not just the historical records, but the probability streams themselves. Every ship, every commander, every crew member will see exactly what I saw. Dr. Chen nodded. But it will only work if they have a reason to look, to listen, to question. She turned to Captain Ven. They'll trust one of their own far more than they'll trust us, especially someone of your rank and reputation. The captain's scales rippled through a complex pattern of colors as he processed the implications. You want me to convince the home fleet to stand down, to question everything they believe in? No, Nova interrupted, seeing the pattern in the probability streams. We need to convince them to look at their own future, to see what their choices will lead to. She turned to Dr. Chen. Can you show them the same timelines you showed us? The crystalline lattice, growing but brittle, versus the adaptive, living structure. The human ambassador's smile widened. Actually, Lieutenant, I think you should show them. You've already proven you can transmit data through their security protocols. More importantly, you understand both perspectives, the Arcturian drive for order and the human embrace of uncertainty. You can bridge the gap. Nova felt the weight of probability settling around her like a mantle. The streams were converging again, showing her the razor's edge they would have to walk. One wrong word, one miscalculation, and the future would shatter into conflict. But if they succeeded, she looked at Captain Ven, seeing the same understanding in his posture. This wasn't just about preventing a war or exposing a historical lie. This was about choosing what kind of civilization they wanted to be. The home fleet will arrive in 6 hours, Nova said, her voice steady despite her racing hearts. We need to prepare our message carefully. Not just the historical records, but a vision of what we could become. She turned to Dr. Chen. Will you help us craft it? The human ambassador gestured, and the probability streams around them coalesced into a workspace filled with potential futures. That's why we're here, Lieutenant. The question is, what future do you want to show them? The home fleet emerged from quantum space like a crystalline constellation, their ships arranged in perfect geometric patterns that spoke to centuries of rigid discipline. Nova watched from the bridge of the VSS Daybreak as probability streams writhed around the massive formation, showing countless possible futures branching from this moment. They're launching fighters, Captain Ven reported from his position beside her. Defensive formation Sigma 7. Dr. Chen stood calmly at Nova's other shoulder, her probability manipulation tech causing small distortions in the air around her. Right on schedule. They're following standard protocol for encountering a Class 1 threat. The next transmission will be, all vessels, this is Fleet Admiral Xeris of the ANS Eternal Light. A harsh voice cut through all channels. You have entered restricted space and consorted with known enemies of the consortium. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Nova took a deep breath, her scales shifting to a determined blue-gray. This is Lieutenant Nova Kess. Admiral, before you take any action, I ask that you examine the data I'm about to transmit. For the sake of our people's future, please, look. She activated the transmission they had spent the last 6 hours crafting. It wasn't just historical records this time. It was a carefully curated journey through probability space itself. Every ship in the home fleet would see not just what had been, but what could be. The transmission began with their civilization's founding principles. The search for order in a chaotic universe, the desire to build something lasting and beautiful. It showed how those noble goals had calcified into rigid control, how fear of uncertainty had led to stagnation. Then it showed them their future, not as a lecture or a warning, but as a living probability stream they could explore themselves. Every commander, every crew member could use their own tactical systems to examine the branching timelines, to verify the mathematics, to see the inevitable conclusion of their current path. Impossible, Admiral Xeris breathed. These readings, they violate every known law of probability physics. No, Admiral, Dr. Chen spoke up. They only violate the laws as you understand them. Your scientists were on the verge of similar breakthroughs 3 centuries ago, before the fear of uncertainty led to their research being suppressed. Nova watched the probability streams shift as understanding began to spread through the fleet. The futures of violent conflict were fading, while timelines of dialogue grew stronger. But they weren't quite there yet. Even if these projections are accurate, Xeris said, you're asking us to discard centuries of stability, to embrace chaos, not chaos. Nova interrupted. Growth. Look at the streams again, Admiral. Look at what happens when order and uncertainty work together. She highlighted a particular probability stream, one they had discovered during their preparations. It showed the Arcturian consortium not as a rigid crystal, but as a living lattice, structured but adaptable, ordered but alive. It showed their civilization learning from humanity's insights while maintaining their own unique strengths. We don't have to choose between order and chaos, she continued. We can learn to navigate between them, just as humans learn to navigate probability itself. We can be strong without being rigid, structured without being stagnant. The probability streams around the fleet were shifting dramatically now. Nova could see individual ships adjusting their positions, breaking the perfect geometric formations as commanders explored the possibilities themselves. The human gift of uncertainty was already at work. Admiral Xeris was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone seeing their whole world change. The High Command will resist this. They've built their power on certainty, on control. Yes, Dr. Chen agreed. But look at your probability streams, Admiral. Look at what happens if they try to maintain that control now that your people have seen these possibilities. The streams showed it clearly. Any attempt to suppress this knowledge would lead to the very chaos the High Command feared. The only stable futures were those that embraced change. Nova felt a subtle shift in the energy around them. The human ship beside them, the Terra Concordia, was beginning to phase back into full reality, its probability shadow becoming solid. Other ships were appearing too, emerging from possibility into actuality. The hidden fleet of the shrouded sector, revealing itself at last. But they weren't appearing in battle formation. Instead, each ship positioned itself alongside an Arcturian vessel, creating a pattern that was neither rigid geometry nor random chaos, but something in between, a dance of order and uncertainty. We offer you a choice, Dr. Chen said softly, not between chaos and control, but between stagnation and growth, between fear and hope. We've spent 3 centuries learning to navigate uncertainty. Let us show you how. Admiral Xeris's next words would ripple through probability space, setting the course of multiple civilizations. Nova held her breath, watching the streams coalesce around this moment of choice. Power down weapons, the Admiral ordered. All ships, prepare to receive technical and diplomatic delegations. A pause then. It's time our people remembered how to grow. Nova felt her scales shift to the deep gold of profound emotion as she watched the probability streams stabilize into a single shining timeline. Not a perfect future. There would be challenges, setbacks, conflicts to navigate, but a future alive with possibility, where order and uncertainty danced together in endless variation. Lieutenant Kess, Dr. Chen said quietly, would you do the honors? Nova nodded and opened a channel to all ships, her voice carrying the weight of history and hope. This is Lieutenant Nova Kest to all vessels. Welcome to the first day of our new future. Let's explore it together. Around them, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter as probability itself celebrated the choice for hope over fear, for growth over stagnation, for the beautiful uncertainty of life itself.